Nikki, why don't you talk a little bit more about the CAB? Isn't it possible, or maybe this isn't such a good idea, but let's say you go ahead and you've implemented electronically the whole CAB or the whole change process. Do you still need to have a meeting? I mean, can't we just automate the whole thing?
And there are organizations that have automatic polling of approvals, and there are ways of providing approval even via email. You click a link in the email to register your approval or your rejection of a particular change. What I would say, though, is that there is still the need for the Change Advisory Board for a number of reasons. And you can see some of them here because these are the goals, really, of the Change Advisory Board. The last item I would highlight, the change management process itself does require review on a periodic basis. It doesn't have to be at every Change Advisory Board meeting, but there certainly should be a process. We refer to this in the EIDL framework as the CSI, or Continual Service Improvement phase of the life cycle, and the change process itself should be evaluated. We should also take a look at failed changes. So in addition to providing approvals, we also want to take a look at any changes that were not successful or unauthorized changes that we may have found in an exception report in our configuration management service system. So there's a lot of other work there besides just the approval.
Well, talk a little bit more about some of the roles that are required here. Do you need a full-time change manager, or who does this?
Especially for some of the small to medium-sized businesses that I work with more often, their roles do not necessarily equal job descriptions. What I mean by that is that there's usually an existing IT manager who takes on the responsibilities of the change manager. So individuals certainly will play more than one role or perform more than one role within the organization. It wouldn't necessarily be the service desk manager who is responsible for incident management. That's kind of a different pace at which they work. But the change manager is usually an existing IT infrastructure manager who would then be responsible for the coordination and management of the change management activities. So he or she would be the process owner. Not necessarily responsible for providing all of the approvals. They don't have the final stamp on that, but would be their responsibility to capture the decisions of the Change Advisory Board and other change authorities. You'll see here we refer to the RACI matrix. RACI represents responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. You can put together a matrix for any process, and within the change process, the change manager would be the one who is accountable for the decisions of the change, for the change management, for the whole process.
Okay, well, are there situations then where you might have to go above the CAB then? How does that work?
There's a number of different authorization levels, and when I talk to organizations about change management, I find myself going back to this model over and over again. Because, of course, I mentioned a normal change is a change that gets approved by the Change Advisory Board or by the ECAB. And the ECAB is the Emergency Change Advisory Board, which would be convened ad hoc at the time of an emergency. There are changes that don't require CAB approval. So if you think of something that is standard, a standard procedure such as resetting a password or a new user setup, some of these things are well-tested, low level of risk, and they may only need the authorization of the service desk analyst or of a hiring manager, for example. But there are times when a change is so large that the risks involved are so high that they need to go above the Change Advisory Board. And it's, again, the change manager's responsibility to help make that decision when an escalation needs to occur. So there are escalations that may happen to the IT management board, so the CIO, CTO, whoever is designated within the organization. Again, very important to document what the chain of command is here. So if a change is going to impact multiple divisions or multiple services provided by IT, then it typically would be sent up to the IT management board. IT management board may in turn make the decision that it needs to be escalated even higher to the board of directors or other executive level within the organization. So if you have a large ERP implementation, for example, that would be a high-risk, high-cost change that would need to get the approval of a board of directors before that started. Just as important as communicating up escalations and risks, it's also very important for the executives and management to communicate their decisions and actions down to the lower levels.
Okay. Well, why don't we talk about continuous service improvement now? You mentioned it before, but let's jump into that.
Sure. So I mentioned the phase of the life cycle of continual service improvement. You know, one of the goals of the Change Advisory Board is to make sure that they are evaluating the process on a regular basis. And we're not just relying, of course, on anecdotal input. We want feedback from the organizations, but we're also relying on metrics or key performance indicators. So so in order to determine our key performance indicators, we want to define the critical success factors. So, for example, if we have a CSF of protecting IT service when making changes, so I want to make sure that I minimize my downtime, then I would want to have a measurement such as I would want to see what is the percent of reduction in changes that have caused incidents. You know, I have some stories that I've gathered along the way, not as big or impactful as I know a few years ago, or just over a year ago at Christmas time, Amazon Web Services had a large outage. There wasn't as much oversight because it was the holiday, and a developer was able to go in and a developer who had production level access and was able to make changes to the way that load balancing worked, and it impacted and replicated because it was an automated system. It replicated across the organization. I spoke with actually it was at a speaking engagement in New Hampshire, and spoke to somebody whose security team had just decided that that Tuesday morning was a great time to change their security policies, and that particular change had a huge impact on the number of incidents that were called into the service desk because it wasn't communicated, it wasn't timed properly, and the IT services were not protected while making that change. So there's a number of other KPIs that we can look at that are related to change management, and you can find lists of these. There's a number of KPI sites and KPI libraries out on the internet, but I've given some examples here.
Okay, and Nikki, I think on the next slide you're going to talk about some additional resources as well.
Well, I did want to recap a little bit and talk about how we can simplify. You know, we've talked, or the title here was "How do we simplify?" And we've talked a lot about the structures and the things that we should be doing. It does seem like a little bit of extra work to be doing things like waiting for approvals. A lot of IT specialists can find the process burdensome, and what we really want to do is to simplify it so that, first of all, everybody understands the process. So documentation and communication are very important. We also want to make it easier for them by providing easy access to request channels. So when we have an automated system, we want to be sure that the IT staff members and even the end users have an easy, straightforward way of requesting changes. We can automate the approval procedures. So if there is a review that needs to happen or other input needed from various staff members, there are ways that we can automate that via email. As much as we might use our service management systems, we have to understand that not everybody is working in either Remedy Force, or Footprints all day long. So sometimes it's easier to have different types of portals or approval processes for those or different interfaces for those systems. And again, going back to CSI, or continual service improvement, part of that review process for changes is seeing how we can make things easier, simpler, and more effective for our organizations every day.
Okay, here are the additional resources then.
Right. So there's a number of resources, certainly for the ITIL framework and the service transition phase of the life cycle. At RightStar, we have a number of white papers out on our website. BMC also has a number of reference books that they will send you if you sign up on BMC's website. They have blogs there as well, as do we. And there's a few organizations that we have partnered with previously, such as the IT Service Management Forum and HDI, which sponsor a number of different types of educational offerings, from white papers to conferences and so on.